What happens when the spirit of the story is more well known than the actual action? And how did the simple act of chastising an underperforming soldier turn into a brief period of peace during the First World War? My dear friends, I hope you are pleased with some bully beef diplomacy. Welcome to I Was Only Doing My Job, an Australian military history podcast. This is the life, service and legacy of Major Leslie George Fussell, MC, who served in both the First and Second World Wars. Leslie George Fussell was born in Ballarat, Victoria on the 3rd of November 1883. He was one of 6 children to Alfred Fussell, the Chief Inspector for the Victorian Education Department, and Elizabeth Jessie Walls. He attended New College in Box Hill, Victoria, a boys' boarding school, and was involved in theatre. He was a moderately well-educated student, and in his 5th form, what we'd now call Year 11, or as a junior in the United States education system, in 1900, he received prizes for mathematics and languages, as well as an award for rifle shooting as part of the school's cadet unit. In 1902, at the age of 19, he sat and passed the May matriculation exams to Melbourne University in English, French, Euclid, Algebra, and Authentic Geography. He would serve in the Victorian Senior Cadet Battalion for 2.5 years and eventually joined the Victorian Rifles, rising through the ranks and eventually holding the commission of lieutenant in 1906, whereon he was placed on the unattached list. The unattached list existed as a way to enforce a maximum length of service allowed for each officer rank to encourage promotion. If an officer failed to be promoted within that time frame, they were transferred to the unattached list to free up the space for another upcoming officer, with the intent of creating a relatively large pool of somewhat trained officers, and that there would always be a fresh rotation of officers filling the ranks of a battalion in the event of a conflict to allow for rapid expansion. These unattached officers would go on to fill support tasks, working staff or special duty, and work as instructors or assigned to senior cadet units as officer commandings. All things considered, he seemed to have a knack for numbers, and by 1908, Leslie had been relocated to Hobart, Tasmania, to take up the post of a ledger keeper for the significant financial institution, the Union Bank of Australia, one part of what would become the ANZ Bank, one of the 4 largest banks in Australia. The following year, he would marry Ruby Evelyn MacDonald in Hobart. By the outbreak of the First World War, the Fussells had relocated to Sydney, as Leslie took up a job working as a bank clerk for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. He formally joined the Australian Imperial Force on the 7th of May 1915 and left for overseas service 5 days later aboard the troop ship HMAT A-32 Themistocles on the 12th of May 1915 as part of the 17th Battalion. The 17th Battalion trained in Egypt before landing on Anzac Cove on the 20th of August 1915. At Gallipoli, the battalion participated in the last action of the August Offensive, the attack on Hill 60, and then spent the remainder of this time defending Quinn's Post. Leslie had proven himself to be a reliable and determined leader, earning a promotion to temporary captain on the 9th of November. Prior to this, on an apparent lull day in October 1915, Leslie's most notable wartime achievement occurs. The incident, as listed on the website of the Australian War Memorial, states that Leslie was instructing the men of his platoon on the finer points of bomb throwing, using a bully beef tin to throw the proper technique. For those who are unaware, bully beef is the colloquial term for canned corned beef that had been the staple protein for the British Army from the Zulu Wars all the way to the Second World War, and it was part of what was called campaign rations, or something that you were supposed to eat while you were foraging for other supplies. The reason why it gained the name bully beef was because the soldiers doubted there was any actual meat, let alone beef, in the actual product. According to a letter that Leslie sent to his father that was published in the papers in December of that year, it is instead implied that it wasn't the platoon, but a single bomber that he was chastising for his inability to throw bombs, and to prove his point, Leslie picked up a bully beef tin and threw it towards the Turkish lines with such accuracy that it actually landed in the opposing trenches. Probably not realizing the hostile intent of the act, several minutes later, a package came sailing over the Australian parapet and contained cigarettes and tobacco, and along with it was a note hastily scrawled in bad French. Now don't worry, I'm not going to subject you to my attempt at reading the bad French, but I will read its literal translation. My dear Australian friends, we have received your present of preserved beef, and we are very pleased with it. We ask that you for another of your souvenirs, and we will also give you a souvenir. Now please accept my compliments in return of your gift of preserved meat. We are sending a piece of tobacco. Your comrades, the Turkish soldiers. P.S. Please throw us a good knife. Now Leslie was less than diplomatic, and with the assistance of a private, sent back a, understandably, less than amiable reply, and this is copied verbatim from the letter he sent to his father. To our friends the enemy, we present our compliments and thank you for the tobacco. Glory be to Allah that you are unable to throw your bombs with the same precision. We have sent you a poor knife. It may come in useful for cutting our throats on Detag. We have given the Huns a hiding in France, 23,000 prisoners and 81 guns. Gott straff England? I don't think. See you in Constantinople shortly. Bomb follows. Your Australian friends. As the story goes, this started a flurry of notes and souvenirs crossed between the two combatants, with the Turks congratulating the Australians for the German prisoners and even going so far as to say they didn't actually want to fight, that they were being made to by the Ottoman command. Once word of this made its way to senior officers on the peninsula, it was quickly brought to an end and the war resumed as before. By the time of the evacuation on the 15th of December 1915, Leslie had proven himself to be a reliable and determined leader, earning him a promotion to temporary captain, as previously mentioned. The 17th Battalion spent a period of time in Mudros Island before eventually continuing the journey to Alexandria in Egypt on the 8th of January 1916. At this point in the war, the Australian Imperial Force underwent a period of expansion and retraining, where the existing two Australian divisions were doubled, with each battalion gaining a sister battalion comprised partly of Gallipoli veterans and fresh recruits from Australia, with the intent that the veterans would train up the replacements, imparting the lessons gained from the campaign. Unlike the other men I've mentioned already in this podcast who were around this time, Leslie wasn't actually assigned one of the new battalions and stayed with the 17th. On the 17th of March 1916, the 17th Battalion boarded the HMAT Arcadian at Alexandria and departed for Marseille, France, arriving on the 23rd of March 1916. From there, the unit travelled to Bourg-Grenier, in what is known as the Nursery Sector near the Pas-de-Calais-Armentières region of France, in the British sector, for training, and would enter the trenches for the first time on the 9th of April. B Company, like the rest of the 17th, would rotate in and out of the trenches in this region, swapping with the 19th Australian Battalion every 4 days over the next 5 months. On the 9th of June, Leslie's temporary rank of captain was made permanent, and while the region he was operating in was referred to as the Nursery Sector, it was still part of the active front line. And while Leslie seemed to weather this exposure to the Western Front up to this point unscathed, the same was not true for the rest of the battalion, with a total of 396 casualties received during this training period, including 59 killed in action. At the end of July, Leslie and the rest of the 17th Battalion would travel to the Pozieres sector and participate in the second phase of what is now known as the Battle of Pozieres, a battle that has been featured in a number of previous podcast episodes, which to its Private John Hines, episode 2, Captain David Twining, episode 4, Chaplain Walter Dexter, episode 14, and Corporal Harry Dalzell, VC, in my bonus episode with War Stories host Preston Stewart. Links to all these will be in the show notes. Following the securing of the town of Pozieres on the 24th of July, General Gough, commander of the Reserve Army, ordered an immediate advance to take the old German lines to the north and east of the town, and it was up to the Australian 2nd Division, of which the 17th Battalion was a part of, along with the British 23rd Division, to accomplish this. The 17th Battalion itself was tasked with the lines to the east, and at 9 p.m. on the 25th of July, they entered hastily prepared launching off points created by the relieved 1st Division, and at 3 a.m. on the 26th, the positions of the 17th were immediately shelled with heavy German artillery and machine gun fire due to the hurried preparations for the attack. And while this slowed the advance, by 3:30 p.m., the 17th was engaged in an intensive bomb-throwing fight with German forces, in which an estimated 73,000 Mills bombs, a kind of hand grenade, had been thrown. Overall, this phase of the battle was a costly failure, with the division losing over 3,500 men. General Haig was understandably not happy with this and took it out on Division Commanding Officer General James Legge, who historically has borne the brunt of the blame of the failure of the whole Pozieres campaign, despite it being a success. The division would get a second chance early in August and end up taking all assigned objectives by the 5th of August. Though at this point the division was exhausted and severely depleted. They would be relieved by the Australian 4th Division to continue the attack, and while the Australian 2nd Division would rotate out for a period of rest and reinforcement. On the 22nd of August, the 17th Battalion was involved in offensive operations to secure the strategic location known as Mouquet Farm, a battle more popularly known in Canada due to its involvement and success than in Australia, As for Australia, it was another costly defeat due to the underground defences employed by the Germans. By the end of August, the battalion had relocated some 36 kilometres to the west of the town of Buval to recover and re-equip before moving on to Belgium along with the rest of the 2nd Division, where it would remain until October when it was transferred back to the Somme. For the remainder of the year, they undertook defensive duties along the front, although they weren't involved in any major attacks. Leslie's reliable leadership and cheerful disposition was recognised by his superiors, who organised for him to be seconded to the 1st Anzac Corps School for further training and for the first 6 months of 1917. In March, Leslie was admitted to hospital for a month, and at this time he was also recommended for the Military Cross for his great keenness and devotion to duty, which was awarded to him on the 5th of June, just prior to his return to the 17th Battalion. On the 6th of July, Leslie would be promoted to Major and would be with his battalion for 3 weeks before he was once again seconded as a Brigade Major trainee. He returned to his unit on the 23rd of November 1917 and remained with them for most of the following year. After the second freezing winter, the 17th Battalion was stationed at the front when the German Spring Offensive of 1918 was launched. During the months of this offensive, the battalion was situated in the Somme Valley, holding back the German attacks. Then, in the summer of 1918, the Allied armies pushed forward against the Germans, and the 17th Battalion was in the midst of these attacks at Amiens, Mont-Saint-Quentin, and Montauban. At Mont-Saint-Quentin, the diary of the 17th Battalion stated that the attack started at 3 a.m. on the 31st of August, and while the small issue of rum arrived and was distributed amongst the men, they were so weary of being pushed so far that a number of the officers were asleep standing up. Leslie, now a company officer, included in his report on the Battle of Mont-Saint-Quentin by stating, "The operation to this time, which called up from the men their best powers of endurance and determination, has proved that their work was up to the best standard of our corps, but I am compelled to place the success of the operations to the credit of our 4 company commanders, so far as this unit is concerned. They were called upon at all hours and at the shortest notice to the continued exercise of their best qualities of leadership and initiative under circumstances in which they have had little previous experience to guide them." Leslie's determination and leadership throughout the final year of fighting and his steady presence in the months that followed earned him 2 additional mentions in dispatches. He remained in Europe through 1919, working on the demobilization of the AIF alongside Gwynedd Purvis Meredith, only receiving his decommission in January 1920. Leslie returned to Australia and resumed working for the Commonwealth Bank. However, this time he took up an appointment as the manager of the Canberra branch in 1921 and was reunited with his wife Ruby. While in Canberra, Leslie would assume a number of other positions, such as Vice President of the Ainslie sub-branch of the RSL, the President of the Licence League, responsible for the discussion of the state of liquor and prohibition in Australia's capital, the Secretary of the Canberra Golf Club, and Treasurer of the Molongo Polo Club. He was also the first President of the Canberra Returned Soldiers and Sailors League, and was integral to establishing Canberra as the headquarters for this organisation. In 1926, he would leave the Commonwealth Bank to become the General Manager of the Canberra Building and Investment Company. Sadly, the reunion with Ruby would be brief, as she would pass away on the 12th of June 1927. Leslie would, by all accounts, throw himself headlong into his various committees and organisations. The following year, on 2 official visits, Leslie would be directly involved in each. First, he commanded an honour guard for the territory visit for the Australian aviation pioneer Herbert Hinkler, but the most important visit occurred when Earl Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, Grand President of the British Empire Services League, attended the future site of what would become the Australian War Memorial and placed a wreath at the memorial cairn placed when construction started. Leslie reciprocated the gesture on behalf of the Australian Returned Soldiers and Sailors League. He was also present for the Veterans Honour Guard for the opening of Australia's Parliament House that same year. Considering his employment status, he seemed to have weathered the Great Depression surprisingly well, as by all accounts he was still able to maintain a public image before leaving the Canberra Building and Investment Company to take up the post as Secretary of the Cooma Pastoral Protection Board, responsible for assessing the impact on agriculture by pest animals or the effects of drought, floods, and other impacts on farming, which was significant considering Australia's predominantly agrarian base at this point in history. By 1934, reports of his encounter on Gallipoli started to gain traction, and by 1935 it was regularly featured in newspapers across the country, and the note Leslie received from the Turkish soldiers was formally handed over to the burgeoning Australian War Museum to go on display, where it still is today. The other milestone that occurred in 1935 was the announcement of the engagement of Leslie to Eileen Harnett of Cooma. It would be a long engagement as the couple would be wed in 1938. In the interim, Leslie was instrumental with the opening of Masonic lodges and RSL sub-branches all over southern New South Wales. In 1939, with the threat of a second global conflict on the horizon, the Fussells welcomed their first child, a son called Anthony Ian, to the world just before Christmas, and the papers were quick to point out that the former Army Major had an AIF all to his own, and the couple would welcome a second son, Douglas Harnett Fussell, the following year. In 1940, at the age of 54, much like Gwynedd Meredith in the previous episodes, Leslie would travel to Sydney to serve in the Second World War as part of the Citizens Military Force at the initial rank of captain as the militia adjutant officer for the 30th Battalion, a post he would hold until December that year when he was assigned as area quartermaster for Narellan. Much like Meredith, Leslie didn't see combat in the Second World War, though he would be promoted to his First World War rank of Major for his services. This posting, however, didn't excuse him from any heartache, as Anthony Ian would pass away at the age of 4 in 1942. On the 28th of September 1943, Leslie would relinquish his appointment to the area quartermaster for the Narellan camp and cease to be seconded for further duties. He was placed on the reserve service list that June and formally retired from the Citizens Military Force in August 14, 1943. For Leslie, his life past his second global conflict included judging horses, dancing competitions, and continuing his philanthropic pursuits, something his new wife also participated in, with both appearing on social pages promoting one concern or another, and apparently, Eileen made a great 3-tier rainbow cake. Leslie also spoke on the topic of nationalising the banking system, though I haven't been able to determine what stance he actually held on the topic. In 1947, the Fussells moved to Camden, and Leslie was instrumental in establishing the Camden sub-branch of the Returned Services League and was appointed its secretary, while also serving as part of the committee of the Citizens' Rights Association. I'm not entirely sure what that organisation represented. He was also an active member of the Australian Liberal Party during this time. In 1948, he gave up his position of secretary for the Camden RSL and the Citizens' Rights Association and the Red Cross for Camden, though not for ill reasons. This was allow fresh faces to steer the organisations. And the Fussells would move back to Canberra that February, and immediately slipped back in the Canberra's social scene. In 1952, Leslie fully expected World War III to break out in 1954, stating that in the past 2,500 years of recorded history, there have been 902 wars and 1,600 minor disturbances. While World War III didn't manifest at the end of the Korean War, Leslie wouldn't live to see the next major deployment of Australian combat troops overseas, as he would pass away on the 18th of June 1960 at the age of 77, but lived long enough to see his surviving son Douglas graduating from the Australian Military College at Portsea and follow his father into a career in the military. Leslie George Fussell took the concept of service to his fellow man very seriously, be it serving in both world wars or in veteran support organisations, the Red Cross and other philanthropic endeavours. What he did completely and without personal regard. Even the passing of his son and wife did nothing to stop a man who had gone to the well of courage more than most to continue to do what he believed was the right thing to do, and for that we are eternally grateful. Thanks for listening to the I Was Only Doing My Job podcast, a Doc Network production. This episode was written, produced, and audio engineered by me, Ross Manuel, with additional research done by Laurie Favell. I'd really appreciate it, and it would help out the show if you took some time to share this with a friend, or leave a review on Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or iTunes, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, as it really helps other people find the show. If you want to know more about today's episode, with photos, show notes, and transcripts, head to www.thedocnetwork.net and follow the show on IWODMJ on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Don't worry, there's a link in the show notes. If you want to follow me for history-related hijinks and other nerdery, you can follow me on practically everything at Doc Winters. Once again, thanks for listening and catch you next time. Bye!